Welcome back for another Monday Mindset Moment. This is your moment. It's your moment. Claim it. So glad you're here. Um, these are punchy, quick 5-minute trainings to help busy parents get some great strategies and tips.
These are punchy, quick,
and
5 minutes.
I know that it's not easy to make a lot of time in between bringing kids to and fro, getting things done at home, and many of us also trying to juggle work schedules as well. So this is a new format. We have one up from last week that you want to go check out called Get Down with Emotions in this series. And I'm so glad you're here. So today we're going to be looking at what happens when we want to anticipate and address emotional triggers. We're wanting to be able to in the moment and also proactively outside of those upset moments, help kids to get to know what they need and how they're feeling and what we can do to support them so that maybe they come in contact with a similar event that used to make them very upset, such as encountering a spider or getting a bad grade or maybe feeling left out at school. Then they're able to come back to that better resource with an updated sort of perception database and just generally more easily able to cope. That's what we're hoping for. And so to help us, I have a few visuals here I want to share with you. Now, as I'm pulling these up, I want you to think about the last time your child was really upset. So upset that you really weren't sure like how to soothe them, how to support them. It wasn't clear. They were very triggered. And when we say trigger, this is what I'll show you what we're talking about. What we're talking about is the combination of some kind of precondition where maybe they are already tired or hungry or upset in some way, and maybe lonely, or maybe even it's been a really loud situation for a while and then finally somebody screams. Okay, so and that sets them off. So it's a combination of a precondition with also their perception database. In other words, how are they perceiving the situation really impacts how well they're going to cope with being in it, and also their story that they're going to tell, like we talked about last week, of what it even means to be in this situation, whether or not they're safe, whether or not they're being taken good care of, whether or not they belong. And then of course the actual event, right? So like music blasting, itchy clothing, seeing a spider, waking up and remembering that you have a big test today. All of these can be events that, when combined with preconditions and your perception of the event, is what we mean by a trigger. And when these things combine, sometimes the reason why we name it a trigger is because it will actually dysregulate our nervous system. We'll have a flash, an involuntary flash of anger or sadness or fear, and other emotions, other strong emotions. And so here's my first hot tip. Help kids recognize what events are triggering for them. And that way they start to have a sense of like anticipation of like, oh, this might happen, and here's how we can get ahead of it. For example, you could just ask us some simple question. What situations or things are upsetting to you? Or, think of the last time that you were upset or mad or angry or scared. What was happening? And just help them articulate it. So maybe like some examples I have here, maybe they saw a spooky spider that they didn't expect, right? So suddenly they're next to a spider. Maybe they were at the park, the second picture, right? And it was just pretty loud and crazy, and kids were running around screaming a lot. And that was the event that, maybe overloaded them. Maybe like the bottom left image here, maybe they were noticing a sense of togetherness and belonging, and they felt on the outside of that. So maybe some exclusion, or maybe they're anticipating that test coming up. Help them notice what events are actually connected to their strong emotions. And you can start to see some themes there. So when I felt left out, when I was surprised by something spooky, when there was a stressful event coming up that I was worried about, right? just being able to name that is such a huge part of raising emotional intelligence and creating more resilience. And then you can even help them sort of tune into their body, and you can empathize with them. And we're going to talk more about that in the next tips coming up later this month. So just helping them recognize what events trigger them is a great step. But we also, so coming back to this, right, that's the top one, is event. So even having that little bit of awareness can be really helpful, because then when you have that awareness, you can start to build in things like helping kids notice when they're less resourced and have from not meeting their underlying needs. So for example, going back to the example, the one with the test, perhaps part of what could be supportive and make it feel like, even though the trigger might still be there and they might still have a flash of some strong emotion, they can temper that and they can start to tame that trigger if they make sure that they're fed really well. If there's anything they're upset about, they've had a chance to vent. Maybe they've had a study buddy or someone keep them company as they're preparing for the test, and they get a really good night's sleep. So this could be a little recipe for success of, even though you're not necessarily going to get rid of the experience of the trigger, you could definitely dampen the impact of it and start to tame that trigger so it's less triggering. Also, just looking at, making sure that they feel physically, cared for and they have security, and then especially love and acceptance. So like Brene Brown would say, a sense of love and belonging are irreducible needs. And what I always like to say is, if we can read the need behind a child's behavior, we can address the root of it. And so thinking about this just from the model that we were looking at in the very first part of this tip of the event and the precondition. And then we also want to address the perception database. So the perception database is where we have an opportunity to help them make sense of their experience. That way they start to, kind of have a sense of where this is coming from. And like, perhaps it's something that the perception they have of the event might need an update. And so let's say this child was at the park and had a really overwhelming experience, remember, with the kids playing, this picture here, right? The second picture. And it was too much for her. And then, so she's crying, she's upset. But then they say, the mom says, well, it's okay, like we can leave and come back another time. And then next time she says, hey, sweetheart, let's go to the park. Her child starts to melt down. It's like, oh, I don't want to go, no. Well, helping her child make sense of the experience of what happened before is really useful, because you could say, well, what happened at the park? Like, what was it that was upsetting? And it was too loud, it was too noisy. And then maybe you would even help them update their perception database by saying, did you know that instead of going to the part where all the kids are screaming and running around, we could have a sweet little family picnic in the quiet part of the park? I wonder what snacks we could have, So it's a way of updating the perception database around what it means to be at the park, so that it broadens the story of, when I go to the park, it's too loud and crazy and I have a bad experience. Now it's like, when I go to the park, I could even have a sweet, quiet corner of the park to have a nice picnic where there's no screaming and running all around me, for example. Another way you can help them make sense of their experience is to see if they are telling any stories that are just not true, right? So like if the child, for example, was really left out, feeling left out on the play yard, which I've been on the yard for 15 straight years as a classroom teacher. I also helped watch the yard. And my goodness, the number of times a kid felt left out when it really wasn't a case of bullying or exclusion. It was more about timing, or just a misunderstanding, or kids wanting to play different games at different times. And so suddenly they feel left out, and just helping them make sense of it by asking questions like, well, I hear that, they wanted to play dragons and you wanted to play race cars. And then it really felt like they're not your friends anymore. Geez, yeah. Wouldn't that be sad if when friends didn't want to play the same game, that meant they were not friends anymore? Shoot, that sounds really, really awful and sad. Good thing that's not the case. And you can say, actually, sometimes friends play different games and have a little time apart. that sometimes could clear it up. They're like, oh, because their idea, their perception of what friend means is you're together doing the same thing at the same time all the time. So see how we can update the perception database, and they could even see, do you remember the time that, your friends made you that really nice piece of art when you were sick? That's something that friends do too. Right? So just building up the perception, the database of like, yeah, we can actually have friendship that doesn't have to look like doing the same thing at the same time. Maybe talk about the usefulness of spiders, for example, and catching bugs and things, and also how they have families too. You can even tell the story, have them watch or like hear the story behind Charlotte's Web, or something can change their perception database. And then in the moment you can say, oh, looks like a spider just like Charlotte. And you can say, well, but we don't necessarily want it crawling around, and it might get scared and bite us. Maybe we should let it be free outside. And that's like such a different thing that, squish it, which could just give a big spike of cortisol and adrenaline, right? And then lastly, with the test, it's sort of like this idea of, in this picture, this image is actually not my favorite for this. It's just what I happen to find, but their perception database around like, what does it mean to take a test? Like, what are tests designed for? Why do we have tests? And I used to tell my students, the reason I'm testing you is just to find out, what can we now put into the review category because you know it really well, and we just maybe need to review it every now and then? And what do you still need to learn? Like that we might need to do some more lessons, and actually, I actually still need to teach you, and we can have some time where you can have some support with these concepts. This is like a sorting exercise for us. So if there's something on the test you don't know how to do, that's okay. That helps us understand what you still need to know. That would especially be true for like a pre-test. Now, a post-test might be around, well, the good thing about a test is we get to find out like where your strengths are and where there are opportunities for strengthening in the subject. I wonder what would happen if we really practiced in the areas where you weren't able to answer the questions this time around. What might happen on the next test? So you're kind of building up to then what would eventually be, kind of your one-time shot kind of tests, like the achievement tests for going into college. Okay, so good job, everybody. This was a quick, snappy format. We went a little over 5 minutes. It's true, because I had quite a bit to share on this topic. But if you found something helpful, please put what it was in the comments in the chat. It helps for other folks who are listening to also hear what you got out of this training. Hi, Deanna. Hi, Sabrina, and all of you who are tuning in on Facebook. So glad that you're in the Raising Our Resilience Facebook group, where you can comment with each other. We also always love to hear from our folks on YouTube in the comments, and I do check them if you tag me, especially on Facebook, and have a question or want to let me know what you got out of it. That's always welcome. Next week we'll be back, and we'll do a little longer format of about 30 minutes for Ask Me Anything, which means on these topics in particular, or anything that's on your mind, come and you can get some laser coaching of a couple minutes. And we'll also pull out some of the questions from our new members. We've got a lot of great new folks, a new wave of folks that just joined our group, that I would love to have a chance to tackle what they are naming as their hardest challenge right now. So lots of love to you on this President's Day. I hope you are having a chance to connect with your children, or maybe take a break, get some things done, however you use your time. I hope you're enjoying it. And as always, I see you as a calm and empowered parent, raising happy, resilient, and confident kids. All right, lots of love. See you next time. Bye for now.